and welcome to all who are here with us as we do our last student panel in Black History Month. We are so glad that you are with us. This has been an exciting month for us. And I've been so excited to meet my colleagues from across the different programs here at GSCP and to just see the brilliance that is part of our community and to share that in a broader format. We are recording tonight and we will send the links once the recordings are finished so that you can share them with those who haven't been able to come tonight. So I am Sharletta Green. I'll be the moderator for tonight. I want to make sure that I introduce my great team. It is amazing to work with these women. Our fearless leader, director, Dr. Gabriela Miramontes, Dr. Maria Brame, Sue Ellen Demiria, Ida Jafar, Dr. Sonia Sharifi Fard, and Dr. Asia Ghazi. These women are amazing to work with. And I'm so excited to be part of the center where we focus on elevating voices. So if you ever get a chance, listen to the podcast, but where we are really committed to engaging with our students to make them the best scholars they can be by tooling and retooling your toolbox. And so we give lots of help with publication and conferences and where to find these things and how to get connected and get involved. So if you're interested in writing Scholarship Without Borders Journal, we're always accepting papers and we're working on our second edition, which is really exciting. We're also looking for peer reviewers. Training is coming up, so watch for the emails that will let you know when that training is. We have certificate programs and we partner internationally. And so that gives everyone an opportunity to really get that global feel. And so this is just some of the work that we do. We have a number of cultural events that are coming up. And so when we get ready to close tonight, I will turn it over to my dear colleague, Sue Ellen, so that she can tell you more about Women's History Month. But let's get started tonight with our conversation with our esteemed panel. We have Monique Lumas-Wright, Wendy Perkinson, Portia Cowlings, and Lofton. I am so excited to have you gifted Black women with me tonight as we celebrate and talk about Black history. We have been focusing in on hidden figures. And the reason why we focused in on hidden figures is because there are so many people who add to the landscape of who we are as Black people and the history of who we are as a culture and a country. And we often get stuck in the space of hearing about the greats, Martin, Malcolm, Medgar, but we missed out on so many of the ones that were behind them, lifting them up, pushing and pulling, and making those inroads and connections. And so tonight, as we talk about the hidden figures of Black history and how we learn to celebrate the contributions we all make, because the impact is communal and local. So with that, I'm gonna let you each start by asking you, why is Black History Month important to you? And I'm gonna start with Monique because she's the person that I see next in my rotation.
Thank you, Sharletta. I really appreciate being here and just this welcoming, loving, warm space that you've created for all of us. Thank you so much. My goodness, Black History Month, it is so important for such an enormous amount of, for reasons, but to be honest with you, it continues to grow deeper for me the older I get. And particularly so after becoming a mother, it really, I think, settles in a little bit differently because I don't just think about myself, but I'm also thinking about children and the next generation. And I'm thinking of my ancestors, from being a descendant of slavery, as well as all of those that are coming from us. I think it's been important because it's really an opportunity to celebrate and bring awareness to humanize a culture, with all its historical deaths, its struggles, its sacrifices, its beauty, the unparalleled contributions that it makes to society, but then it's also like a love letter, right? Like it's an opportunity for us to just celebrate ourselves in this full appreciation of the incredible legacy that has come before us. And then just the celebration of all the beautiful Black brilliance, you know, that surrounds us today. So I'll leave it there, but so important for so many numerous reasons.
Thank you. Wendy.
I don't know how I did that.
You're good.
I'm so grateful for what Monique said when she talked about Black brilliance, and she talked about passing that on to future generations. And there's so much to it. But when I think about, you know, I learned about Carter Woodson, and he's considered the father of Black history. You know, he graduated from Harvard right after W.E.B. Du Bois. And his research was based on telling the stories of African Americans, because, you know, he's the one that wrote The Miseducation of the Negro. He wrote one before like 1861 or something, and then he wrote another one after that. And because what he found in his research was that, you know, the stories were not being told. And because the stories were not being told, it created this culture of a continuation of submissiveness among Black people after slavery. And he considered it to be a situation of white racist historians were the ones that were putting the information in the history books. And it was like an eraser. But not only that was it an eraser to erase our history out of it, a lot of it wasn't even recorded. I think it wasn't until 1960 that actually information was actually being documented about contributions that African Americans made. And so that's not even long ago. You know, he also asserted in his book, The Miseducation of Negroes, that if Black history is communicated or taught, then it would potentially decrease racism. It would, as I would call it, like negate the Stockholm syndrome. Even as we've been talking about imposter theory over the last imposter syndrome over the last couple of years, so much when you understand who you are and where you came from. And not just that, even history prior to slavery. But I'll just leave it at that for now.
Thank you. Ra, you want to go next?
Certainly. Good evening. I'm very happy to be here. Nice to see some familiar faces. I went to Egypt with Monique, so we just got all the Black pride on that trip. But for me, I find that every year, especially as I get older, Black history is an opportunity to get to know myself, to get to know my heritage, my culture. And, you know, unfortunately, we have a truncated history because of slavery, but now with the internet and access to so many different forms of information, I find them even able to reach beyond where I thought it was before. And so for me, I work at a sports research institute. And so I look at the intersection of gender, race, and ethnicity, gender, race, ethnicity, and LGBT studies. And while I'm so happy to look at Black history, I'm also in a space where Black history is being made every day. Coming off this past Super Bowl, we had 2 Black quarterbacks. We had our first Black female coach. So I also feel just privileged to be in this time right now where I am witnessing so much Black history, especially Black women making history in so many different spaces. So again, it's just a nice time to get to know myself more and more.
Great. I'm loving the global majority, Karen Hunter. All right. Thank you, Rob. Portia, last but not least, let's hear your thoughts on this.
Thank you and good evening, everyone. Thank you, Sharletta, for the introduction. When thinking about Black History Month, I started thinking about words that resonated with me. And Black history is something that I think that we can all connect to, but during this month especially, I think it's a time where I'm in a sense of reflection and remembering, also thinking about my own history and my ancestry and my culture, my heritage. I'm thinking about the legacy that my ancestors left for me and to get me to where I am today. I think about Black history is about being educated. It's about being educated about our past and our history beyond slavery. It's about having the knowledge to understand who we are as a people, who we are as an individual. Black history is about community. It's about our families. I think that Black history is so much. And as Ra eloquently said, Black history is me. Black history is now. Black history is me progressing in the role that I'm in. I have a science and public health background, and I am an advocate for maternal health outcomes for Black women. And so Black history is making sure that we continue the journey that so many have led us to this point, and that we continue to make our mark and add to what history means for Black people across the diaspora. So that's Black history to me.
Right. Thank you for these thoughtful responses. So moving right along, I only sent you 3 questions because we're going to have a discussion, but I wanted to start with these. In light of the current climate in our country, how can having African American studies and celebrate Black history help shift the atmosphere? Because we live in a space of socially engineered fear around phenotype. And so how may, these celebrations more fully help us in shifting the culture? And anybody that wants to go, start out.
Well, I'll jump in. I definitely, as long as people are willing to embrace it and embrace the information, embrace the celebrations, and not just particularly people that are not African American, and not just consider it as, oh, that's another program, oh, that's another thing. Once it's embraced and understood and realized, it has to be shifting. For example, I'm an adjunct, and I was teaching a class the other day, and one of my students, I'm in Detroit, and one of my students, she did a presentation on the fact that she was a figure skater, and she was also a coach. She was from Detroit. No one ever knew that we had figure skating in Detroit. She was doing it ever since she was a kid. She was probably in her early 30s. She has a whole line of other little figure skaters. And although I teach at a predominantly white college, I couldn't help myself. After she gave the presentation, I said, now that's the way you celebrate Black History Month. And when I tell you, everyone in the class just cheered, and wow, that was just really great. I mean, she laced up her skates and everything. So that right there just shifted the atmosphere just so much for people to realize, wait a minute, there are so many contributions that we have offered and that we continue to offer.
Thank you. Who would like to go next?
I'll jump in after Wendy.
Okay.
So as I previously mentioned, I work in the sports world, and just like Wendy was sharing, finding out we exist in these spaces we don't know about. I was at a Representation Matters conference last week. I met the president of our Phoenix NASCAR Raceway, who is a Black woman. And I was like, we're in NASCAR? And so for me, in this climate, in this atmosphere, especially when we're really fighting to get our stories told in education, our stories told in curriculum, it's also important for me to recognize the local people who've made a difference in my community. While I may not have control over what curriculum's taught in school, I know I can educate myself, especially in the spaces that I'm walking behind amazing Black people in. And so for me, I try my best, especially during Black History Month, to use my platform as much as I can. My Instagram, I'm going to be unapologetically Black. And I try to start in January and go through March, where every day I'm posting a different historic figure. And I also try to do these not well-known historic figures, people who are making small differences. I even bragged on my mom one time. She got a call yesterday that she was asked to be interviewed for the Ouachita Baptist University Historic Hall of Fame. She had no idea she was in it, My mom grew up in Malvern, Arkansas. She was the first to integrate at her school. She was also the first Black homecoming queen, first Black ABC affiliate in her area. She was the first Black contestant in Miss Arkansas. And so even looking at that, there are these people who are making these differences that aren't plastered across the news, that aren't in our books, but have made a difference in our everyday lives that we don't even know about. So even trying to learn my active elected officials, and trying to like respect them and taking the time to learn what did they do to get here, what are they standing for, and finding ways to support people within my community, within my industry that have broken through ceilings and right now need our support. And so I think that's imperative, is being able for those people who are the first, the onlys, to be able to find ways to support them, even if it's just to let them know like you're here and that you're present and that you recognize them and their existence.
Thank you. That's powerful. Who would like to go next?
I can jump in.
Okay.
I mention and add too, in terms of, how can having African American studies and celebrating Black History Month help to shift the atmosphere? And not to be super serious, but you know what, I feel that it can actually save lives, to be honest with you. I'm trying to say this without getting too emotional. But, in terms of what students learn and fail to learn in the classroom, it really does shape not just their perception of African Americans, but it humanizes African Americans. And, in our climate right now, we do have a crisis when it comes to Black women, particularly with infant and maternal mortality. The rates are through the roof. And it's, because Black women, don't have a sense of believability around themes of pain when it comes to, healthcare professionals. And so when we think of this in comparison to white counterparts, celebrating Black History Month has so much more power to it than just, a mere celebration. It really could shift the paradigm and how people think and view Black women, Black men, and really humanize our experiences. And so I think ultimately that will shift in terms of how individuals view racism and how, certain stigmas and negative stereotypes perpetuate culture. So thank you.
Okay, Portia.
Yes, powerful, powerful. As I was listening to you ladies, I was thinking how the current climate when it comes to Black history is that there is this sense of that Black history is not history. It's that it's something outside of what history is. And I think that is very important, especially as Black people and people who are not Black, that Black history is not just for Black people. Black history is history. And I think that once we can overcome the thought of that Black history is designated just for Black people and that it's not history for all people, it's so important that in order for especially our youth, I think that it is a concern for me as well that they are not able to have maybe some of the opportunities that we had as far as in African American studies. I had friends who actually, double majored in African American studies, did, all these different African geared degrees, which weren't seen as this high level degree. Like, where are you going to get a job in that if you do African American studies? Where are you going to go if you do art, African based art? Like, how are you going to apply that to, the industry of the climate of where we are in the world? But I think it's so important that we not only tell our history, it's important. That is why Black History Week was started. That's why it was expanded to Black History Month, because our stories were not being told. And now with the attack on the climate in several states, particularly one I'm thinking of particular, but I won't say, but the attack on different, trying to literally take out, slavery out of books for teachers not to be able to say, take out racism, all these different things that have an impact on history in our society, in our culture, in this country, and also around the world, is doing a disservice to all people, all individuals, to understand and have the knowledge, like I was saying earlier, to be educated and to understand where things come from, why things are the way they are, and how, and what are we going to do to change things, or how are we going to move forward from where we are. So I think the climate, it's so important for these African American studies to be taught, because it's not just about African Americans, it's about all Americans, it's about all people. And like Monique said, you know, the humanizing of people, and that these are not just because of the color of your skin, it doesn't mean that the history is less. The history is less precious because your skin is a different skin tone. So I think that the climate right now, we're under attack. And I think that it's something that we have to all be aware of, not just us as Black people, but all people, that we need to embrace all history.
Okay, thank you. So I'm messing with Rob because I see that shirt. I listen to Karen Hunter. I listen to Dr. Greg Carr. And one of the things that I think we forget when we're talking about Black history, because it does kind of seem like it's outside of the norm, is that when we talk, and we set aside phenotype, y'all, we talk about human beings, all life starts in the continent of Africa and migrates, right? And there's not but one species, Homo sapiens sapien. And so when you begin to anchor in the well-being of human beings and you humanize humans, all the things that they need are the same. We need food, clothing, shelter. We need employment. We need to be able to, you know, take care of ourselves, and we need to have meaningful relationships to thrive, right? Those aren't different just because the phenotype is different, just because you have more melanin or less melanin. Those things don't change. And so when you start thinking about the way in which we have been divided and conquered, it causes just as much harm to us as Black people as it does to our white counterparts, because we're connected and interconnected. And I want to know what your thoughts are on this interconnection that people want to ignore because they choose not to see it, and they choose to try to see these differences, and what that means to you as you think about, again, this whole notion of hidden figures who in many cases were willing to build coalitions across aisles with people in order to do the greatest amount of good for society as they knew it at the time. And again, I'm anchoring in this whole idea that the global majority is Black and brown around the world. And we got to start treating one another with dignity and respect, or we're going to destroy all of this. So what are your thoughts?
I'll kick us off. So one of my very first childhood crushes, Bill Nye the Science Guy. Don't judge. It was propaganda, it was put in my face. But he recently actually did post a video and showing how the heat disperses amongst the world, and then took it out and did it if you were just to do one skin tone, if you just do brown, and how it disperses. And really anchoring in this idea of like, we all come from one place, we're all one species. Our shades might be different, but that's because of vitamin D in the sun. And it had me thinking, because, you know, one, it's important to have allies and to have people to speak on your behalf, to have sponsors, all these different things, but also to recognize the social concepts that we use to guide our lives. Like, while that might be based in science, I'm not questioning that factual, we know that science has been used to weaponize us. We know that science is political. And it really, at the end of the day, it doesn't serve anyone. You know, it creates more divisiveness. And as, like you said, we are the global majority. The world is getting a little more caramel mocha latte day and day. And so I do think it's important one, recognize we are the global majority. Especially, I find that challenging. I grew up in suburbia, predominantly white institutions. I actually was on the phone with my mom today talking about wanting to move to a place where I'm not the minority. And so while I may not be able to do that now, what I do is try to put myself in spaces that are, and that are somewhat different than me. So I went to Colombia this summer after going to Egypt. And so to be able to see us spread about the world, to see us on these different ends of the Atlantic slave trade, and to commune with people and see, like you said, we all want to be loved. We all want shelter. We all want food. We want connection. We want humanity. And, I often think of like, what if we were blind, and what would that world look like? Would be, no pun intended, but would we treat each other different? I am also a big fan of Jane Elliott. That's my girl. And she often asks white people, would you want to live as a Black person? And they often say no. And so I think sometimes you need those allies to help challenge our white counterparts, help challenge other brown people, because we're not a monolith. But you do need the support, I think, of allies, but also being able to listen when they need support as well. So during the pandemic, I had to check myself, because I saw someone else posting about check on your friends who are Asian. And I realized I wasn't doing that to my friends who have supported me throughout different issues. I wasn't checking in on them to see if they were okay with the Asian hate that they were experiencing. So as much as I want the support of others, I also have to make sure that I'm doing the same, especially other Black and brown people who are also just fighting the same fight, just a different little shade of it.
That was excellent. There were so many bits and pieces that was just so delicious about what you said, Ra. And I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. And just checking up on one another. And Sharletta, what you were saying, I was just reflecting, you said so much, but just the one little piece I was reflecting on, our shared humanity. That spiritually, how I look at things is I look at everyone as a spirit. And it's as if God just dropped different spirits in different bodies, different colors, different places. And we show up in life, learning, growing, understanding, for whatever reason, the package that you arrive in. So I arrived here as an African-American Black woman. And so I live out that life. And arriving on this planet as that, globally, be very challenging. But I think it was a couple of weeks ago, and I can't remember her name. I think it was Goosley or Gooseby, when she talked about racial healing. That really helped me at that time, because I was going through a big struggle on my job. And, she brought me back to that concept. And like Ra was saying, think about your friends. It could go beyond color lines. But in regards to just us and being able to connect, African-American history is so important. For example, I have two friends who are Nigerian. One person thinks she's from Ghana. And there's conversations that we have where stereotypes have run so deep with how Africans, look at African Americans based on media. They're hood, they go to jail, they're this based on the media that they see in Africa. And then African Americans can sometimes think, oh, Africans, they're hungry on the street, they're, all of this. And it's like that kind of hate, self-hate, unconscious or not, I think is perpetuated when we don't share the authentic truth of history, whether it's American history, African history, but like Portia said, here, Black history is a part of American history. And to try to just erase it out of existence is horrifying.
If it's okay, I would like to jump in here after Wendy. you brought up something, both you and Ra, that had me thinking, and I was over here writing, I'm listening, I'm just taking notes. So don't think that I'm not paying attention. But what you just said, Wendy, about Africans and African Americans and that perception of how we view each other. It reminded me of a story when I visited South Africa, and I was there for a conference, an international conference. And, so it's people, uh, Black and brown people, just all people from all over the world that was there. It was a really great conference. But one of the things that I found very interesting is that the Africans, the South Africans, when I was speaking with them and having conversations one-on-one, they were coming up to me um, pretty much in as far as, comfort. You're from America. Oh my gosh, I didn't know that you guys had it so bad over there. This is in the climate, this was 2016. This is right before the elections were happening with Trump and with Hillary Clinton, and they were looking at all this stuff going on in America. They were looking at all of the shootings of Black and brown people by police, and they were so empathetic to me as an African American woman living in America, thinking that I had it good, thinking that there was no racism. Like I'm not experiencing that. And they're thinking about how they just came out of apartheid and thinking about like, wow, we thought, we did have it bad, but we didn't realize how bad that you have it over in America as well. So I thought that was really interesting because we have these stereotypes. We have these perceptions of how we think the other side lives on the other side of the fence. This must be how they live. This must be what's going on. They have it better because they're over here. Oh, they have it better because they're over there. So I think that that's very important, that we have to interconnect with each other and have these conversations. And it was refreshing for me because I didn't, coming from America, sometimes you don't always have a worldview. America can be very into themselves in America. What's going on here? I find it very interesting when I'm traveling internationally that everywhere I go, anytime I turn on the news, it's about the world, everything going on in the world, everything that's going on worldwide. And when I'm here at home, it's about us. It's about what's going on down the street, what's going around the corner, what's going over in this state over here, state over there. Not to say that that's not news, that's not important, but I think that it just goes to show how the world is focused on the world, but America is focused on America. And I think that that's how these interconnections between, people and across the aisle is so important. And Sharletta, you said something about, reaching across the aisle, regardless of your color and things like that. Now, I wasn't able to get the background. I tried, but I did put this picture up behind me. And I don't know if you guys can see that there's a Black hand and a white hand that's shaking hands. And this actually is a little bit about my history. This is the sign from my great-grandfather's hotel that lived in Philadelphia, Mississippi during the Freedom Summers when the 3 civil rights activists were killed in Philadelphia. This sign on his hotel, he was the only Black owner in Philadelphia, Mississippi that had a hotel for civil rights activists to be able to come, for Black people to be able to come, and for them to be able to stay there. And this symbol of the hands was to let all people know that regardless of their color, that they can come here and that they can work together and that they can fight for the civil rights. Now, my great-grandfather at the time was older, so this was his way of being able to be a part of the activism, to be able to offer his hotel for people, the Freedom Summers that were riding through Philadelphia. And the three civil rights activists that did unfortunately get killed that summer, they did stay here. So I think that this is it's just another example of how when we work together, how we can accomplish so much when we work together and see that it's about humanness. It's about work. It's not about the color of your skin. It's about what's right. And, that people shouldn't be treated the way that they're being treated. So I just wanted to point that out and say that about the interconnectedness. So that's what I had to say.
I'll just jump in. My goodness, that's so lovely to hear all of three of you speak to this piece. There's just so much to unpack with that question. And I feel like I echo all of your words in terms of what you shared so much, in terms of just the fact that at the root of everything, is our shared humanity. I mean, that really is why we're all here. And like Wendy, I too have always seen ourselves, one another, as these spiritual beings, having an earth experience. And so I think a lot of it, I struggle, with this ideology of the fact that we are all shared here as humans, one another, to really understand that we share pain and love, and joy, and we cry just like, the next person does when we have these experiences that really do connect us all. I'm a firm believer in the fact of like, there's no separation in, between individuals. And I think that's why we have so much, I think, hurt, racial injustice, the trauma that we've had here in America, which lives in our bodies. Our bodies has memory. And so I think that's part of some of the complication, right? Like the ideology of loving, your neighbor as thyself, but also having this integrated sort of interpersonal relationship that sometimes we can't even verbally express, but it's been in our bodies, from our grandmothers and great grandmothers era. And so I think it's important to just be honest with it all and open to it. And when I think too about the global piece of it, what Portia, what you were mentioning in terms of when you're traveling internationally, and I think people, really do just kind of want to see, individuals as how they show up, and in their lives, right? Like we just want to be able to interconnect with one another. I remember being in Italy years ago, 20 years ago plus, and I came across a African refugee camp, and I was so marveled at that because at the time, I really hadn't learned a lot about social justice from like a global sort of lens. It was really just all kind of what we see on the news and what kind of we, American kind of news and what we want to kind of be able to just see from the lens of just America, right? We don't have these international channels that really do connect us to other problems. And so seeing that, I think, very closely and personal, knowing that there was a war going on that I knew nothing about, and really being able to kind of share this experience with these refugees, then it really kind of all connected for me, and just in the ability to understand that we're all, here together, and whatever we can do in terms of showing up for one another is what we need to be able to do to focus on that. So thank you for letting me share. That was just a piece to try to wrap everything up.
No, thank you. This is a rich conversation, and you all continue to bring up a number of things, but there's a theme in this whole notion of this socially constructed space called race and the harm that it causes. So there are three things. The first one is we are trendsetters as Black folk. When it comes to the culture, the music, the, what's being worn, we can make a paper bag sexy, y'all. Our people have learned to take the worst of the worst and turn it into something amazing. I mean, who else can turn chitlins into a delicacy, right? Who else can make chicken wings something everybody wants, and now they cost $1, $2 a wing when you used to could get them for like pennies. And so what's interesting about that, when you talk about this international lens, is colonialism has literally pit us against our brothers and sisters in other places. And so how, as global leaders, as we think about our own history and what this celebration means, do we begin shifting that narrative so that, number one, we talk about our connection and that it doesn't start in slavery because, they just drop people from one end of the Caribbean to the other, right? and that we're inventors, and that it's not about where you're located, but it's about how we're connected. We got this one planet. If it explodes, we all gone. And there are people that don't seem to think about that. But we're living in a time where there are some people that are okay with destroying everything, but not thinking about how it impacts even them. And so when we start talking about this international space that you've all brought up, how do we as global leaders start thinking about these narratives and how we weave our history into these narratives and make them connective tissue, as opposed to my plight is worse than your plight?
There was something Wendy said earlier when you were mentioning kind of this long history of kind of this divisiveness among African Americans and Africans. And it really, to me, is just like, this is an example of white supremacy. This is an example of colonization, of creating this divisiveness amongst us. And I'm so challenged, especially in the recent years. It has been so hard to not be filled with hate, to watch the injustices go along across our country, to watch children in cages. Like, it is very hard for me not to try to pinpoint my hate and anger at one group. And so when I do have these moments, I was like, all right, I could spend my time hating and being mad, or I could spend my time learning and appreciating something else. And so especially when you talk about culture, I'm trying to challenge myself to consume more non-American culture. If I'm going to consume a British show, I can also consume a Nigerian show. And teaching myself and educating myself. And when I went to Columbia this past summer, and I feel so fortunate to be able to go, I never expected that their art walk would be all Black women. The paintings are all of Black women. I had my hair up in a braids and a bun, and my tour guide brought me to the front, and he said, "Do you know why coffee is our #1 export?" And I said, "Well, no." And he goes, "Because the African women brought the coffee beans in their braids." And that was something no one ever taught me. I remember I was sobbing on the spot, and there was like one other Black person in the group, and I was like, "Do you feel it too?" Because it's not just me. But just even going and learning our history in other places and learning about it. And, we're not all able to travel. So even, again, consuming different film, music, and all of these things that are cultural expressions of people, especially when you look at art and entertainment, and trying to learn and embrace, just as we would want someone to listen to our culture, to embrace it, to not necessarily appropriate it, but actually learn about it. And so trying to do that for all of us in the African diaspora, and showing just kind of a love and acceptance to everyone. It's like, I just got off on a different cruise port than you did, what really was the difference. And so really kind of getting back to that humanity, and that everyone deserves a life with dignity, and we should also make an effort to learn about their lives.
I'll jump in. Sharletta, that was like a dissertation type question, like a Thanksgiving plate, like question. It was very full. But if I'll take just a little bite, when I think about just the conversation about Africans and African Americans, and when we talk about how Africans were colonized, whereas African Americans were slaves, it's a little bit of a difference there. Africans being colonized, they were still able to, in some retrospect, keep a lot of their traditions, whereas slavery really wiped out a lot of it. But as Ross said, knowledge is power, and learning and understanding. I've been on this plight to try to find Black people everywhere. So in my church, we have a lot of international relations. And we've just opened a church in Sweden. And my first question is, are there Black people in Sweden? Not that there needed to be there for us to open up a church. But they sent back videos of all these Black people. And it was just wonderful to see. And it was wonderful that they were Swedish. And it was wonderful to see, you know, what I thought a Swedish person looked like. I'm in Detroit, so I've spent a lot of time in Canada and understanding even some differences in the culture there. So what am I saying? How do we bridge or create crosswalks or build a bridge? I think it is about allowing yourself to be educated, knowledgeable, because that brings a lot of power.
I was just going to add, oh, sorry, you going to go ahead, Portia?
Go ahead, Monique.
I was just going to say, you know, there's so much to the question as well, but as just referencing, you know, African Americans and the sense of style. And, you know, I think it's just so important to state, you know, that we originate, you know, from kings and queens. And so there really is this level of godliness and creativity and strength and intelligence and beauty and resilience that just kind of carries through and continues to show up, you know, even in the 21st century, we see that time and time again, and how important, you know, that is to just experience and to acknowledge. I think is really important. And I was going to also mention another point. I'm sorry, and I lost my thought. I'm so sorry, Sharletta. I was thinking about, like, as Wendy was talking, you know, about the dynamics of culture, and I was thinking about my own family and how we have such a mixed lineage in terms of African and not understanding sometimes often the root of where, you know, you're coming from in terms of tribal, and then also trying to experience, you know, those that do have that connection and how that does kind of show up differently, you know, for us in this day and climate. And I think it is important to acknowledge that there are gaps and there's so much in our history, you know, that we are still trying to, I think, learn and grow, and that it's just so inexhaustible. And I just think that's a really valuable point too, that there is so much to explore and that we're still learning, you know, as we're here today. There's just still so much that's hidden, you know, that's among us. So just wanted to add that as well. You go ahead, Portia.
Thank you, Monique. Whew. Yes, Sharletta, that was a loaded question. And the first thing that I want to say is in relation to what Ross said about being angry, you know, being a Black person, you're angry. And I remembered this quote, and I may or may not remember the person who said it. But I believe it was by Dick Gregory. And he was saying that to be Black in America, a woke Black person in America, is to be in a constant state of rage, because you constantly are aware and familiar, you know, to everything that has happened, to everything surrounding you. You're so in tune with everything, and it brings you in this constant state of rage where you're just like, how do I deal with this? How do I deal with this anger? And how do I still try to, you know, how do I also, you know, try to change it, and, you know, and not just explode upon the world, because that's not going to help anything. But how do I have this constant state of rage and still be able to do good in the world, to try to make a difference and make a change? So, Rob, when you said that, I was like, ooh, yes, it is definitely that state of rage that you can be in as a Black person in America, when you understand about colonization and about ancestry and slavery and things of that matter. And something also that you said, Sharletta, about, you know, this whole notion of my plight is not your plight. It's like people have, you know, got into the state of mind where, you know, they think that things don't affect them. It doesn't affect me. This isn't something that I have to be concerned about because this is on the other side of the street, or this is in another neighborhood, and not understanding that community. And I think that that's a lot of breakdown today, that the sense of community has broken down so much that people don't understand that regardless of where we are all connected as one. We are all connected in some kind of way. In that community, we work in community. We're better when we work in community. And I think that's something that colonization has taken from a lot of Black culture, because thinking that we have to be these individuals, and individualism is what is, I think, and this is Portia's opinion, is what is, breaking down, Black communities and Black people, because we're in this sense of thinking that we have to be individualistic when we've never been individualistic. It's always been about the community. It's always been about the tribe. It's always been about other tribes like working together. So I think that the colonialism has definitely broken that down in Black spaces, that we no longer have this sense of community and working together and understanding that we're stronger together, and we can do more together. And then there was something. Oh, and then you also mentioned about, our culture and how, being the originators and how people, they embrace Black culture, and we see it, we see the appropriation of Black culture, and no one wants to, they want to appropriate our culture, but they don't want to see ourselves of who we are as humans. They want to, dress maybe the way that we dress. They may want thicker lips the way that we may have thicker lips. They may want bigger bums the way that we have, some of us can have bigger bums, and all these different things, and appropriate, the natural beauty that of Black women, but yet, and Black men, and yet they can't see our humanity of who we are as Black people, which is a problem, because you can see, it's like to be able to separate the two, that I can see that this person looks nice in this outfit. I can see that their lips are full. I can see that their body has curves the way that I want these curves, all these things, but I don't see them as a human being. And I can't understand and be, and be empathetic with what has, history has, done to them. And so that's a problem, I think, with Black culture appropriation, is that they're able to separate the two. It's almost like saying that, I'm colorblind, but that's the issue, because you should see color. And not only should you see color, you should, when you see color, understanding that, just because that person has a different phenotype, like you said, Sharletta, doesn't mean that that person is any less human. They don't have any less needs than you do. They don't have any less wants that you do. And they don't deserve all the things that you have access to that they may not have access to. So I think that is something that we really have to work on in this society. So.
Yes, okay. I want to open it up to the rest of the group in the room. I want to preface it this way, though. Stevie Wonder, right? Do you all remember "The World's in Need of a Love Today"? And I wonder if we understand that love is not just a feeling, but it's an action word. And that we've talked about community, and we've talked about the importance of community and thriving community. This whole idea of a richness of embracing one another in the human landscape as brothers and sisters, connected and interconnected. And so as everyone begins to kind of bring their questions to the table, I want to know how love of self and love of others plays a dynamic role in this space of understanding our culture, embracing it, teaching it, and inviting other people to learn it. So I want you to think about that. I know, dissertation question. If you have a thought, go right ahead and throw it out. And then the rest of our group can jump in and ask you questions.
I do have a bit of an academic funny. Cultural appropriation is like writing a dissertation and not citing anyone. But in what you said, it's been a lot of unlearning for me. Right before I started a doctoral program, I was actually in a treatment program for an eating disorder. And it's something that I try to be public about because I grew up thinking that people with eating disorders looked a very certain way. And I was told multiple times it was a white girl thing, but able to take a step back and realize that was white patriarchy at its finest, making me think that my body's not valuable. I'm too big. I can't take up space. So for me, a lot of it has been unlearning, and then also allowing myself to heal. I think, this whole strong Black woman, Black girl magic, sometimes I'm weak. Sometimes I'm not magical. Sometimes I hurt. Sometimes I just want to lie in bed. And so allowing myself to rest, to not be okay, but also trying to do that for the Black women in my life, but especially the Black men. There's not a lot of grace in this world for Black men to be vulnerable. And so I think for me, especially with the people in my world, my brothers, trying to create spaces that they can exhale, they can breathe, they don't have to be something, there's no expectations. But a lot of that is challenging myself to be vulnerable first, because sometimes it takes your vulnerability to make someone else. But really for me, a lot of it has been healing and unlearning in a way to start that self-love process. Redefining what it means for me to be a Black woman, redefining what it means for me just to be a human in this world. I don't have kids, but I have nieces and nephews, and what do I want them to think of me is now become like the most important question. The world's going to have their judgments, they're going to have their hate, they're going to think all these sorts of things. I care what my niece and nephew think. They think I'm super cool because I have blue hair, but I also want them to think I'm a good person. And so a lot of that is just trying to be a role model to the people that matter to me, because the ripple effects will happen regardless. But I do think that first step of loving myself has been healing. Thanks.
I wanted to add, for me, love is the most powerful force in the universe. And I've always felt like in order to love thyself, you really have to love others. And for me, it's really seeing the beauty in other people, which really helps to see the beauty in myself. And through that, it's always been a journey of like photojournalism. I really connect with imagery. And when I travel, or even if I'm just walking outside, I really do connect in seeing individuals and trying to see them for their center and for their spirit and who they are at the root. When I started this panel discussion, I think you asked, why is Black history important? And I said that it's like a love letter. And so I just circle back to that because it is an expression, it is an action, and it's a powerful force. And so I think just through this celebration, even just through tonight, we're loving ourselves, and that's just a powerful, powerful position to be in. So thank you.
I'll jump in real quick. Love is such a powerful force, like Monique just said. I mean, it burns like fire in a good way and in a crazy way. I mean, you can float in it like on water. It can just take your breath away like the wind. And for me, it is, like Sharletta said, it's not a noun, it's a verb. Love is a verb, and it's action, to actively love. And so I think what Portia and Rob mentioned earlier, that anger that can get in you, sometimes even when I'm doing my research or my dissertation, it has hindered me because I've just gotten so angry. And I'm just like, I can't. And I'm in a new position, and I'm experiencing and other people. And so these aren't just stories that we're telling, these are things that we can sometimes go through on a day-to-day basis, and it can really affect your mental health. Like, you're really going through tokenism. You're really going through overt racism, and you have to be there 9 to 5 to go through it. So thank God for Sharletta, who had to talk me off the ledge the other day. But not only that, I had to say a prayer. Like, I had to hibernate for a few days, like fast, like give me something, because this is just over consuming. And I feel like this anger could potentially turn to hate, and I don't want that. So in my prayer time and in my hibernation time, it was like, and I call it the Holy Spirit. It was like the Holy Spirit just reminded me of something so poignant that happened to me when I was 8 years old. And like Monique said, you know, that racial pain could stay with you and kind of shape you unconsciously, and you didn't even realize it. And so when I was 8 years old, I was in the Nutcracker Ballet, and this little girl, I was about 8, she was about 8, she was Caucasian, I was Black, obviously. She walked into the bathroom, I was fixing my hair with her friends, and she just said, you know, Black people are dumb. And I was just floored. I was the same Wendy, but a little Wendy. So I was very inquisitive. I kind of wondered, what is she talking about? And I kind of asked her, why would you say that? Where did you get that from? And she said, my mother told me. Meanwhile, her mother was the director of the Nutcracker that I was in. So I went back out to rehearsal and I just studied her mother. I wanted to see, is she treating us differently than she's treating others? Is there some difference there? And I was blown away because I couldn't tell the difference. And then I think that shaped something in me that, wow, this could be so deceptive that I could be taken on. It could be talked about how much I'm appreciated. Oh, you're just a great dancer. Oh, you're just this, but really you think I'm dumb? And I carried that a long time until 2 days ago, where the Holy Spirit brought that to my attention. And I just said, I never forgave her. And I wonder, where is she in life? I wonder, did she keep that narrative of history that her mother gave to her? I wonder how abusive that is to have a child to think like that. And I just prayed for them. And in my prayer, I made an intentional decision to say, I love her. And it was hard. But when I did that, it opened me up and love spilled out. It was spiritual. It was supernatural. I can't explain it, but I was better at work. I was better in my research. It was like I came above the turbulence. Now I can look at it and research it. And I think that's important for us as researchers and behavioral scientists.
Okay. Now I feel like I'm in a session because this is much needed healing. I feel even when you were saying your story, Wendy, I was thinking to myself, wow, when was the first time that I experienced racism? And was it overt? Was it, microaggressions? Like, when was the first time that I experienced racism? And I was 6 years old. And I remember that, I remembered as you were saying that, and I was thinking to myself, oh my gosh, Wendy has it right. Like, I've never forgiven this person. I never thought to forgive them. I never thought to say, I love this, to have that outpouring of love, to heal, to release myself from that trauma, even though, it's decades since it's happened. But, my experience was, being in the first grade, and my teacher, who was Indian, telling me that, doing things of not allowing me to go out for recess, things like that, not allowing me to go out to recess and things like that to go play with the other kids. I mean, when you're 6 years old, you're not, yeah, you see the other kids playing, but you're thinking, oh, well, she's telling me that, oh, well, you have to read this, Portia, or you have to finish up this, or you have to do this. So thinking that maybe I'm a little slower, even though I wasn't slow, coming from kindergarten, like I was, very advanced, but you look at, this person is of authority, they're your teacher. So you do, and you listen to their, because it's a part of your molding as you're growing up. And I remember my grandmother picking me up from school one day, asking me, how was school? And I'm like, oh, I got to go to recess today. And she was like, wait a minute. What do you mean you got to go to recess today? It never occurred to me. She had asked me all the time how school was. And I always said it was good. It was good. It was good. But this day, because I got to go to recess today, it was like, this is something new. So let me tell her this. And as you can imagine, grandmother went on down there. Mom, you know, everybody, the family unite, and they went to the school, you know, talked to the principal, all these different things. But what ended up happening, the teacher was so upset that I said something about her mistreating me, that I stood up for myself, not knowing that I was standing up for myself at the time. But she was so mad at me that the next time that I was in class, she defied what the principal told her and made me stay in again. And then, and proceeded to tell me that she hated me and my family, hated me and my mom. 6 years old. So now I'm wondering, well, what did I do? Like, why do you hate me? And so as I grew older, you know, in the story, I won't go into what happened after that, but you can imagine how my family reacted. But when I got older, I was 14 years old and I saw her at my church, and I was with my grandmother, and she immediately recognized us. I mean, even though I was older, she remembered my grandmother. And she, you know, tried to say something to us, and my grandmother wasn't having it. She wasn't having it. You know, you mess with my baby, you know, at a young age. But I realized when you just said your story right now, I'm like, oh my gosh, I have never forgiven this woman. You know, I think that in my mind, I don't think about it like that. But recently, I think I had just told the story to my colleagues, and it kind of just came back up, but I never even thought about, you know, forgiveness, and that this is the gift that God has given us, to be able to forgive, and that forgiveness is not for the other person, it's for us. And the healing, and even what Rob was saying, the unlearning and the healing process, you know, that we all are, like, you know, having to go through as we grow older, is just being that we don't have to be these strong people. We don't have to be these strong women. We don't have to be the backbone of everything, that we can just be, because we need that space to just be. I have one of my best friends who's going through a really hard time right now. And she just told me, Portia, I am not okay. I'm not okay. She said, I'm always used to saying, like, anybody asks me something, I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay. She was like, I am not okay. And I said, I'm so happy that because you're not okay. You're not okay. And it's okay to not be okay. You need to be able to not be okay, so that you can have the space and the time to grieve, to do the things that you need to do, so that you can eventually be okay. But right now you're not okay. And I love that she said that, because she is that person. And I think a lot of us do that, where we say, oh, we're okay. Oh, I'm fine. Oh, this and that, you know, and we just kind of roll it off, and we just keep rolling with the punches. But we're being punched, and we're not allowing ourselves the opportunity to heal, and to give ourselves grace, and to actually operationalize self-love, and what that looks like, to truly self-love ourselves in the action of self-love and loving others. So, okay, Wendy, I'm going to have to do some prayer and forgiveness. Thank you for that. That, to me, that was a testimony, and that was something I needed to hear, because, you know, you don't always think about those traumas, especially when we're young. I never thought to forgive, and I need to forgive her. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank It's important, obviously, to heal, because being Pepperdine students and obtaining our PhDs, how can this be studied? How, you know, we're the leaders, and it's our turn to go out there and to make change, and we're all, you know, not healed. And I would think, you know, like, a lot of times I would think, no, I have to stay angry, because that anger is fueling my passion to get stuff done. And what I've realized is that sometimes it does, but it's not really anger, it's just passion. But other times I need to be healed. I need to be whole so I can look at this research, so I can uncover the good, bad, and the ugly. So I can be the expert, the researcher, the behavioral scientist that I want to be, so I can fulfill the mission that I feel that God has on my life. And I can't do that all broken and bent down. And why are they calling me dumb? And they don't like me. And oh, I'm so mad. You know, all of that emotion. I have to be able to rise above the turbulence, like an airplane, and kind of dig back in it, research it, figure it out, and help, you know, to do my part in history, my small little part. And I think that's the biggest thing that I got, but thank God for that, Portia. Yeah, go ahead and forgive that person and be healed.
Well, I think you should have told that little girl, Wendy, that you might be stupid, but you can get smart. What's she gonna do about ugly? You can't get rid of that.
Something my grandmother would have told me. I actually went back home and told my mom, and she was, you know, her perspective was, you go back in there and you show them, you know, you hang in there. And I did, but I didn't realize I carried that with me all this time. And I'm not that young, like I'm a seasoned, marinated woman. So it's been with me for some decades.
Other thoughts or questions?
I just want to thank this panel for some really candid conversations that are heartfelt and what we need. This is only the second month of the year, and we have 10 more of these bad boys. 10 more of these bad boys to go before we get re-energized like this again next year. And so I thank each and every one of you for being authentic and transparent and real. I know those are synonyms. I realize that, but that's for emphasis sake. I am a whole doctoral student, remember. But I want to thank you, because in you all sharing your stories have helped us to connect with them in various ways. I speak for me. And what you've shared has resonated so with me. Where I see light, where I had previously saw quite a bit of darkness. Raw, you empowered me to, I'm like, it's so funny that she said that, because I almost wore my black. I have a t-shirt, like I have a real, there you go. I have a real big t-shirt game. And in the month of February, I have a different t-shirt every month. That one, me and Sharletta got the same shirt. I actually, when I saw her with the burgundy one, I went and bought me a yellow one, because one of my brightest colors is gold. But I almost wore my Black Girl Magic shirt today. I didn't get off work in time, so I didn't do it. I said that on my work uniform. But we are always expected to be the strong Black woman. We are expected to be magical. When we stand up for ourselves, we're bullies. And using the term bully is my terminology, only to give the perception of that angry Black woman thing, and to make people scared of us. And so you have freed me from that, Rob. Thank you. And I am just forever grateful for the golden nuggets that Monique, Portia, Wendy, my homegirl, always showing up for Detroit. That's the kind of love I'm speaking of. And Sharletta, as usual, you know how to put together a team of all stars. So thank you, ladies.
I have to admit, this sweatshirt was by chance because I wore this sweatshirt to work today because I was a tired Black woman and did not feel like getting dressed. Thank you, Mom, for this Christmas present. And that's always my, I'm like, I'm gonna wear a hoodie, but I'm gonna make it Black.
We have a question in the chat. How have you broken the bondage mindsets that have been placed on us by generational authority, specifically family? Thank you, Michael.
I'll jump in here. So recently, and this is going back to my great grandparents, and yes, my great grandparents, and we did a family reunion. And for my grandmother's mother's side of the family, which we hadn't done like ever. And so I was being a little baby historian. I was looking up all of the research and finding out all the information so that we can pull everything together, knowing that I knew some things, but I didn't know everything. My grandmother is the oldest living child. She's 94. She has dementia, so she does remember. Her long-term memory is good, but her short-term memory isn't that well. But she was giving us all the stories. Her cousin, her first cousin, we call him brother. We didn't know why we called him brother until the reunion. But her first cousin, and he's in his 80s. His father, which is my great uncle, and my great grandfather, both bought in Mississippi, in Philadelphia. They bought acres and acres and acres and acres of land. One thing that I learned when I went to this reunion and just hearing a lot of history from brother, hearing a lot of history from a lot of my other elder family members was that my great grandfather and my great uncle never worked for the white man, as they said it. They were always entrepreneurs. They had always worked for themselves. My great grandfather, like I said, owned a hotel. He had 2 other businesses in Philadelphia. He had a cleaners and he had another building for just like events. My great grandmother and my great grandfather, they built a school for the community because there wasn't one that for Black and brown children to go to. There was actually where the community actually came together to actually build this school. Yet when the community didn't pay the rest of the bill, the white man is, and I'm just saying the story how it was told to me. The white man actually went into my great grandparents' accounts and took the rest of the money to pay it off without their consent, without their knowledge. And because it was for the community, even though it was wrong, they were happy to have made that contribution because they know that the community needed it. Learning these things about the impact and the history, that the part of history that my great grandparents were a part of, and the legacy that they left for us. We still own the acreage of land in Mississippi, over 300 acres that we own. Knowing that they worked what they did and they worked for us to be able to have this freedom that they had to be entrepreneurs, to be able to work for themselves, thrive for themselves, to be able to have businesses in their community, to be able to contribute to their community. They helped children in their community go to college. They paid for them to go to college. I think understanding all of that about my own family history, it's like, wow, I didn't realize how that DNA was, growing and budding inside of me. And that, doing all of this is understanding that this was the bondage breaking that they were doing when they were in their time trying to set up their family's legacy for the future. So I think that that is something that I'm very proud of. And it's also helped me realize that because this is in my DNA, that nothing can stop me. I can break all bondage, and add forgiveness to forgive those who tried to put me under bondage when I was a young little girl, and to break those chains of trauma, to be able to rise above. I wrote down Wendy was Rise Above the Turbulence by Wendy Perkinson, to be able to rise above the turbulence, because I think that it is understanding how that my family broke those bondage chains back in the early 1900s, helps me show up differently today, knowing that, and to be able to continue to strive to do better. So that's what I want to, that's what I got, Michael.
Anyone else want to tackle this question?
I would say exposure, going to events like this, listening to conversation, listening to the experiences of other Black people. I've always been someone that likes to dance to the beat of my own drum, peep the background. That was not intentional, couldn't figure out how to do it right. But in learning other ways of living, my last grandparent died when I was an early teen. So it's really been my parents and their siblings, but both my parents came from broken households. They've been married now 42 years. And so for them, it was creating something different than they knew. And so I've been fortunate that they've given me the freedom to do that for myself. But a lot of that has been exploring and seeing Black people in all different shapes, sizes, colors, flavors, and everything all around the world, and seeing that there's not one way to live life. There's not one way to be a Black person, not one way to be a woman, a man. And so I think really just knowing that we don't have to repeat the past. There are so many options that come before us. And I think when it comes specifically for me making decisions, it's like, what is going to bring me joy? Because if it's only going to bring anger, resentment, make this heavy feeling in my heart, and that's not something I want to keep moving forward, even though it might have been the way it's been done or the way I've experienced life before. Every day is a day for me to make new decisions, not only for myself, but the ripple effects that are going to have around me. So yeah, I would say just learning about the different ways people live their lives and finding the beauty in all the things that they do.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I'll jump in because we've been talking about the strong Black woman concept or angry woman concept. And I grew up like that and still, have that badge in my drawer, and I take it out and then I try to put it back in. But answering Michael's question, talking about breaking bondages. So in 2016, my grandmother, who was raised during the 30s. So my grandmother, she in the South, and she was the help. Like, she was a maid, she took care of children, all of that. And she raised my mother, who was raised in the South, but then they migrated to Detroit for a better life. My mother grew up like in the civil rights movement, and then here I came. Well, my grandmother got breast cancer in 2016, and she died. No, it was 2014, and she transitioned. My mother got breast cancer in 2016. During her treatments, I was diagnosed in 2018. What kind of generational curse is going on here? So I went to, and then my mother passed away. So I went to take the test where they look at your genes, the BRCA, I can't remember what it's called, to see if it's in your family. And I was so shocked. It's not even a gene that runs in my family. So how is it possible? Well, my grandmother, she had to display a certain amount of strength during the 30s, and I appreciated that. She was very strong, and we appreciated that. She taught my mother to be that way. My mother was very strong, held everything in and forged through. She taught me to be that way. I've been very strong, and yeah. And so it had to be shared experience of how we handled stress, racism, challenges, what we ate, just different shared experiences. I don't discredit for the strength that they had to display at all. But I realized that I have to do something different here and be more vulnerable. Like, what is that? How do you do that? Be more open, learn to forgive, and just live life lighter, because they forged the way so I can have the opportunity to do that. And so now I'm good, praise the Lord. But when I had that anger spout that Sharletta talked me off the ledge of the other month earlier, I was like, I can't let this fester, because that's been a bondage and a pattern with the women in my family to have to be strong. And that goes all the way back to slavery, you know. So I don't discredit that. I appreciate that, but you have to find, I don't know, it broke the bondage when I guess I trusted God, but found a different way to live, because I had the opportunity to do so when they didn't.
And I'll just add, you know, just from Wendy, when you're speaking, I'm shaking my head. I'm thinking of my grandmother. I'm wearing the necklace, you know, from her. She passed away just a few months ago. So when you talk about strength, we talk about legacy and all that stuff. I'm just nodding with you. I understand that. I get that. And then also too, Portia, to your point, you know, coming from a family of entrepreneurs, you know, being taught opportunity, understanding what that looks like and being able to model that. I kind of think, you know, we take the good stuff, right? Like, I think it goes from generation to generation to generation. And we just take the good stuff of what we have been passed forward with, and we keep going. And I know for sake of time, I'll be really brief, but I remember, you know, being maybe 13 years old. I went to a French private school, and me and my really good girlfriend, we were at the phone, you know, trying to make a phone call right in front of the school, very elite school. A guy comes by and yells at, you know, calls us the N-word. I had never even heard that before. That was like such a shock. We looked at each other and we laughed, like immediately laughter. And I say this because we both, and we talked about this not too long ago, actually, we had forgotten it and then just started sharing, and it kind of came up. We were so loved, and we were given so much confidence, you know, in our childhood. We were giving so much opportunity. We watched our parents model so much hard work, you know, and effort, that we literally laughed at the concept of someone trying to spew hate, you know, in our face. And I think that's probably my grandmother's, and would be such a beautiful moment for her to know where she came from, to see her granddaughter, you know, receive such hatred, you know, spewed at, and would instantly laugh, because just being so filled with love. And so I just think, even to my own daughter, who's even more light in terms of, you know, carrying any sort of level of anger or anything of that nature. And it just keeps getting lighter and lighter, because we take the good stuff. And I think through generations, we're able to kind of break those bondage. I don't think it's overnight, but I do think it's over time.
Thank you for being with us. I want to make sure that I thank each of our panelists for, number one, sharing their stories, sharing their hidden figures through the hidden history that we often don't talk about. And for those who've attended, this has been a rich conversation. We've had rich conversations throughout this month. Pepperdine has some of the best and brightest minds. I don't want us to be hidden figures. I want each of you to take your place in the world in the way in which it's intended, whether it's standing in strength or standing in humbleness, whether it's allowing the tears to flow or laughing and dancing until the joy comes. In your scholarship, in your being, be all that you've been sent in the world to be, because there are generations coming behind us that need to know the stories that we stand on in order to be who we are today, to make the world a better place. I want each of you to know what a dear and amazing experience and honor this has been. Thank you, Dr. Gabby, for giving me the opportunity to lead this. Thank you all for saying yes. You didn't have to, but you did, and I'm so thankful. We have had church at each of these gatherings in some way, shape, form, or fashion. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that it is the faith of our ancestors, no matter what they called God, that has led us to this place and will continue to lead us. And I thank you for sharing that open, authentically, and honestly with everyone. My dear colleague Sue Ellen has placed in the chat the link tree for Women's History Month. We hope that you will join us for those events. We look forward to continuing to serve you by celebrating culture and all the different ways that we are who we are as human beings in our different shades, flavors, sizes, colors, experiences, and expressions. And I leave you with this thought, this prayer. When God created you uniquely. When God looked into the world and saw that the world needed the gifts that you had, God dared to speak your name. And then when God spoke your name, God chose the family that you would be a part of. With all of its good and all of its challenges, with all the things that are shaping and molding you, with all these experiences, because God knew what God was doing when God called you by name and said, breathe and be. I am so glad each of you exist, because without you, I could not be who I am. I am because we are. This community that we continue to create and cultivate while we are here at Pepperdine continues to feed us. Don't allow movement and matriculation to keep you from being in community with one another and supporting one another throughout the rest of the journey that we live, where we serve, where we do our work, because the world is a better place, because each of us breathe, have our being, and said yes to the divine. We'll do the work you've purposed us to. Keep that work in mind in everything that you do. Allow love to be part of everything that you do. But more importantly, authentically share you, because the world can't be what it needs to be without each of you showing up fully. I bid you blessings on this evening, and I thank you for being with us. I hope that you've enjoyed and you will continue to enjoy all that we offer at the center. Good night.
Thank you and good night.
Thank you, ladies. It was a pleasure. It was an honor serving on this panel with you all. I've learned so much. So thank you, ladies, for sharing all of your stories. Thank you.
Thank you. I feel the same.
Yes.
Good night.